Hi friends, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today, oh boy, I've been sent the video that Ken Hackathorn did on the Wilson Combat YouTube channel about 11,000 times about do you really need a red dot? And so today I want to talk about whether a red dot is kind of functional and good for most people, talk about some of Mr. Hackathorn's points, and maybe think about a path forward.
Newbold Targets is now Throom. I use Throom targets on the range for all the benefits of steel with none of the drawbacks. They're made in the USA too. Pick up a set to make your shooting more fun and effective.
Let me say from the outset that Ken Hackathorn has been teaching good people to do bad things to bad people for probably longer than I've been alive, okay? And certainly for longer than I have had any interest in defensive handgunning. So the dude's a real been there, done that, and I have nothing but respect for him, okay? And listen, when you've been around the world that long, when you're a real been there, done that, you're allowed to have opinions, and those opinions are highly qualified opinions. And so we should pause and listen. I know there was some real consternation because he was kind of curmudgeonly and he was kind of maybe a little get you damn kids get off my lawn about the red dot in that video. I didn't necessarily hear it that way, but I could see how some people would. I mean, honestly, the kind of, the grumpiness kind of missed me. Honestly, I wasn't really super excited about it, but maybe that's just because I like the red dot and so I was wishing that he was my friend. I've also never met, I think I might have met Ken Hackathorn one time, but I certainly don't know him well. And it's not like I could text him and ask him questions or whatever. I'd like to get to train with him a little bit before he fully retires. But I want to talk about places that I agree with him in his analysis and assessment, and places where, as a guy who trains people all the time and does this stuff and has run a red dot a good bit, that I disagree. I also want to say that I think that Ken should be admired for saying, hey man, I've run iron sights my whole life, but I got a bunch of dots, and he had a bunch of dot pistols. And he's put around 20,000 rounds through dot guns. And I think that gives him some places to talk. Now, I brought the dot guns that I currently have in the house, the pistols anyways, out to kind of play show and tell too, since he did. That's great. I've got a couple here. This is the very first P30 LEM that I had with a dot on it. This guy here is, I probably got 10,000 rounds through this particular gun. Next one that I had, this is Benvolio, carried this gun for a good long while. This is a Gray Guns P30 LEM, has a Holosun 507 on it right now. Beautiful gun. I've got 20,000 rounds through this guy. This is a P30 long slide, not named. It's the gun that I've been testing the Steiner MPS on, the Teutonic mailbox up here. God, what's a big dot, man. That dot is monstrous. And that gun's only got a couple thousand rounds through it. This is a Springfield Hellcat. When they first came out with this gun, they sent this to me. I don't know that they're super happy with my opinion of it, but it's got a Shield RMSC on it. And then, of course, this is Theseus. That was my carry gun up until very recently. He's got just over 40,000 rounds down the pipe. Boy, this gun's a mess right now too. It's about to go in and get some major maintenance on it. This is my current carry gun, a Langdon Tactical LTT Elite P30. With an extra light spring. The only thing I've done to it is add the grips. These are Jerkman custom grips. And this gun right now has about 1,000 rounds through it. So, I mean, you're talking 40,000 rounds through this gun, another 20,000 through this gun. So that's 60,000. There's 70,000 with this one. 71,000. This gun's got 2,000, so that's 73, 74 on this one. So just on the guns that we have on the table here, I've got about 74,000 rounds through them. And I know some people can, they go, no, there's nobody that shoots that much, whatever. I actually do. I shoot, 15 to 20,000 rounds every single year. It's part of why MagTech pays me in ammunition. So MagTech's one of the sponsors of the channel. They make incredible ammunition, and I make them pay me in ammo instead of dollars so that it makes me shoot that much. So I admire that Ken's got 20,000 rounds. He's probably got 100,000 more in irons or more. I probably have more experience with the red dot than Ken does, but obviously his long experience in teaching handguns is a big deal too. Now, one of the things that he said is because he has 100,000 rounds of iron-sighted shooting, that it would take him 101,000 rounds to get automaticity with the new sighting system. Frankly, I disagree with that. I think that from an adult learning theory perspective and adult educational principles, it really doesn't do that, because the 100,000 rounds includes that he's got includes all of the handgun shooting fundamentals, grip and trigger and body mechanics and those things, and that's part of his automaticity. The only thing that you have to kind of reset is you have to reset where your visual focus is. I would argue, and in talking with very high-level shooters that are in the competition world and doing really high-level stuff with iron sights, they tend to learn to accommodate their vision too. And so kind of the old school paradigm of a hard front sight focus is kind of out of vogue, quite frankly, and it should be out of vogue. And so what you really have to do is keep people from coming back and looking at the dot. Looking at the dot is not the way you want to do it. You want to simply be target focused. And Ken says, well, right now I've got to say target focus, target focus, target focus. And I think that with a decent bit of dry practice, it took me, honestly, after, so I'd been shooting irons for about 15 years when I started on the dot journey in early 2017. And it took me about 1,500 dry presses. It took me about 1,500 presentations. Well, I guess more than 1,500 presses, 1,500 presentations or so to get acclimated to my eyes not seeing the dot. So I don't agree that it would take more than what you've got with iron sights to learn a new sighting system. That to me is like, okay, so I've been driving a manual transmission, right? I learned on an automatic transmission, then I add a manual, and I've got to drive more hours in the manual than I did in the automatic to accommodate this new system of shifting gears. I just don't think that's the case, and I don't think that's how adults learn. He does say, on the other hand, that a new shooter who uses a dot from the very beginning tends to pick it up quicker than irons and make more improvements quicker. I totally agree with him there. And I agree that those new shooters show markedly better scores immediately when they start with the red dot. And so that to me is actually a reason that you'd want to start somebody with a red dot. And he does say this, that if you're a one percenter, not a one percenter like an outlaw motorcycle gangster, but somebody who is in the 1% training, who really is going to put in the time, that a red dot is preferable. And I certainly think that's the case. I think that that's actually demonstrably true, and demonstrably true for a long time. But I think that it's not just the 1%. I'd guess it's more like the 50%, quite frankly. Now, he's 100% right that if you're the kind of person that just throws a gun in a sock drawer and doesn't think about it ever again, you buy a gun for home defense, a pistol, you throw it in a sock drawer, you load it and throw it in a sock drawer, and you never think about it again. Well, I don't think any sighting system's going to help you, quite frankly. I think you're going to be mediocre, and it's not going to make you any better. I think the downside of a dot, if you're that kind of person, is that you got to remember to change the batteries. But I think we live in an age now, people got smartphones and smartwatches, people are used to changing batteries. And if you go, hey man, if you're going to buy this sighting system, you have to remember once a year to change the battery in it. And so make sure you put it in your calendar, an annual reminder to change the battery in your dot. You're probably okay. I do think that, again, if you're that person, though, are you going to the internet for gun advice? Probably not. You probably don't care, and you're probably not any interested in it. For those of us who are interested in this, we're probably interested in it because we're enthusiasts, or at least we're very curious what the best thing is for self-defense, and we're willing to put in the little bit of work that will make us significantly better with the dot. Now, here's where Ken is going to call me a clown, okay? Is because he makes a very dogmatic statement that there's no advantage to the red dot inside 10 yards. And frankly, I think that's wrong, okay? I think he's right that anything outside of 10 yards, the dot is a very significant advantage. Certainly outside of 20 yards, you get to that 15 to 20 to certainly 25 yards, and the dot is far and away better than irons in trying to make those hits. But he says there's no advantage to them whatsoever inside of 10 yards. I really disagree. And I think the way that we can see that is just go to the competitive shooting world. And if you look at the best in the world, or even if you look at the kind of moderate shooters, you look at your average B or even C-class shooters that are competing in USPSA, there's a significant difference in scores between production and carry optics. I mean, there's just a vast thing. At the very highest level, there's something akin to about a 10% advantage to the dot over the irons. Now you might go, well, it's only 10%. Guys, if you understand the shooting sports, do you know the monstrosity of difference that 10% is? I mean, those guys and gals at that level are trying to eke out 0.2% differences. And those are the differences between first place and 6th place at their level, and they get a 10% bump. That's why it has its own classification and its own division. So that's a vast improvement, and so many shots in those divisions are not long shots. They're in that 10-yard or in range. And so not all of it is attributable to the 10-yard and in, but I think that properly understood, the dot is better even inside 10 yards. And I do think the thing that Ken does not account for understanding 0 to 10 yards is a 0 to 10 yard small window shot. And so target size is what matters. And while we might say, well, a full size value target at 25 yards is much easier to hit if you have an optic. Well, that's not different than if I got to shoot somebody right in the ocular cavity at 7 yards. It's really not too far from about the same problem. And you go, well, when are you going to have to do that? Hey, man, I could see a bunch of armed robberies where, we see those all the time where there's not a clear foreground and I got to drive that gun out and I have a small window to get a hit. And those happen inside 10 yards. Go watch the main channel. We see them happen all the time. So I think the dot is a significant advantage inside 10 yards for anybody who can actually see how real private citizen gunfights go, and we see those on the channel. And Ken says, I think I quote him in that saying, you're on crack if you think that it has an advantage inside 10 yards. Well, call me Tyrone Biggums, man, because you got any more of that crack? Now, he also says that we got to actually look for probabilities, not possibilities. Of course, he talks about Eli Dickens, who stopped the active killer at the mall with about at least one shot at 40 yards. I don't think all of his shots were at 40 yards. I think that he probably hit him at 40 yards and then drove in from there and got more hits. Absolute hero, not denigrating what he did. But I do think that what we see on the channel is that shots at beyond 10 yards are not that uncommon. I mean, gunfights tend to start in that 5 to 7 yard range. That tends to be pretty good, even 3 to 7 yards. But of course, 3 shots at 3 yards in 3 seconds is a total myth. And we see private citizens taking shots at 15, 20, 25 yards, not irregularly. And those shots have to hit their target. And there's an active, honest to God, deadly threat. And so even beyond, the Eli Dickens, the end of the bell curve stuff, when we start talking about, hey, you're the first responder in an active killer event. We talk about Jack Wilson at his church. That shot was about 17 and a half yards. And he had to make that shot toot sweet. He did with iron sights. Jack is a hero and a warrior and a heck of a shooter and a firearms instructor, and there's no question about that. But there's also no question that if he had a dot on his gun and he knew how to use it, it would have been an easier shot for him, that he was up to the task that day, and props to him. Now, Ken also does say that one of the downsides of the dot is cost. There's no question there. If you're going to put a dot on a gun, it's going to cost you money, right? So, these are all P30s, and P30s don't come optics ready, so you got to pay to get them. Well, that's not a P30, that's a Hellcat, and they do make a Hellcat that's there, but I wouldn't recommend that gun. But these guys here means you got to pay to have it milled, you got to pay to have different sights put on it unless you put a Shield RMS on it, and you got to pay for the dot. So it's not cheap to do. And so if budget is a big concern, well, then you probably want to stick with the irons that you got until you can save the budget. So to me, the thing with that would be, well, it's not no forever, it's just not today. And I'm going to accommodate that when I can, when I have the budget to do so. And maybe I've got $50 a month to put aside until I have the $500, $600, $700, depending on the optic. A good Holosun optic costs you $350, and then another couple $100 to put the optic plate. If you got one that's already optics built, the optic plate's probably, $40, and then the $340. So you need maybe $400. Might take you 6, 7, 8 months to save that money. But expense is a thing, and it's real, and I'm not arguing that. Now, the other thing that he says that I disagree with is durability, okay? So I will say this particular gun is a great example, and actually, believe it or not, this one is as well. One of the things that you can see here is I have a couple of these guns, and in particular, I don't know if I'll be able to show you this, but you can see that front sight there is actually pinned and drilled, and the reason it's pinned and drilled is this guy's got 40,000 rounds. This optic has run that 40,000 rounds, and this front sight walked out at about 14,000 rounds, and so it just walked off into the wild blue yonder and yeeted off into the berm. Now, in my classes as an instructor and as a student, what I see is, if anything, I see iron sights fail at maybe a slightly higher rate than dots in class. We do see dots fail. Dot will fly off a gun sometimes. A dot will stop working. The optic will go away and it has problems internally or something like that. Now, I've put out a call, and I put out a call on all my socials I'm looking for somebody who has had a pistol-mounted optic fail in a real gunfight. In other words, they drove that gun out there to see it, and either the optic had fallen off, or the dot wasn't working, or something like that, or the glass was cracked and unusable in a real gunfight. I haven't seen any of those. I'm not saying none of those exist in the real world, but to me, the durability question is kind of over as long as you're using the quality brands. Straight up, I would not recommend the Shield RMS. I don't think it's durable enough, and I've seen those fail regularly. But as long as you're using the quality brands, you're using Trijicon, you're using Aimpoint, you're using Holosun, you know, those ones, they're gonna last. They're gonna handle the problems. You might run into some challenges. I've had challenges with all of them. I've had an RMR that you know, the connectors cracked on it and gave up the ghost. I broke a Trijicon SRO really quick. Neil had a problem with his Holosun. So we've had, not that they've never had problems, but again, I've had front sights yeet off into the berm too, and I've seen a lot of that. So while I don't disagree that reliability is not, you know, a nothing factor with dots, I think it's not as big a factor as you think, and it's also an administrative factor. So when you put your firearm on at the beginning of the day, of course, you want to check it that it's ready and that it's right. So that means, again, I'm going to make sure that my magazine's well inserted, make sure that it's chambered correctly, and make sure that my optic is working and correctly, you know, understood, and that it is in the place that I expect it to be before I start my day. And so if I do that as an administrative act, I don't think that durability issue is that big an issue. Finally, Ken says he's not so sure that this is not going to be the next fad, that it's not the next, you know, grips, you know, the laser grips or those things. I really do disagree with him there. I think what we've seen is that 20 years ago, people said, well, optics on rifles are no good. And then we went and fought with them in the sandbox in Iraq and Afghanistan for the longest time. And now, I mean, the Marine Corps doesn't even train shooters on iron sights anymore. To put iron sights on a rifle for the major fighting forces is just asinine. They wouldn't even think about it. They are all running optics, and of course you'd never think of doing anything else with your optic but optics on a rifle. I think pistols are headed that way as well. As they get more robust, as they get longer battery life, as they get we get more understanding of the stresses that they undergo, that they're just getting more and more reliable. And I think that the idea that they're not here to stay, I just totally disagree with. Now, that said, I'm not set on the dot. If somehow the next iteration forward, you know, is a holographic implant in my eye that tells me where the gun is pointed by some magic trickery, okay, man, if it works and it's good, I'm in on that. I'm not a slave to the system. I am a slave to the task, and the task at hand is putting accurate shots with speed on target when I need to. And I think for right now, the optic is the thing to do. And so as much respect as I have, I do agree with several points that he made about people, but I think in a fundamental sense, I kind of disagree. Do you have to have an optic? No, man. We have plenty of people show up at classes that are iron-sighted shooters. We work with them just great. We teach them how to use their system that they've got the best. With my friends and stuff, I joke with them. We recently had a badge cam that the sergeant who took the shots, and he did good work with those shots to put a perp down, was using iron sights, and I jokingly called him Gun Amish because he's a friend of mine, and so I gave him a hard time. But that's just what it is. It's just a hard time, right? And I don't care if you don't want to run an optic. That I won't be at your gunfight. I don't care. For me and mine, guess what? It's my carry gun. It's got an optic on it because inside of 7 yards, I think it is faster. Specifically and particularly, I didn't make this point earlier, if you understand how to appropriately use a low ready position and you know that that dot is in your vision, in your periphery, you actually have your sight aligned already. And I'm looking at you, but guess what? In my periphery, I can see my dot. So as I bring this up, guess what? The dot comes with it. And so I can get there much more quickly because my dot is in my window in my periphery, though I am not looking at it and I can't see it. I can see it in my periphery, so I can come up here and break the shot that I need to more quickly with confidence than I could having to acquire the iron sights. That's my opinion, and you can take it for what it's worth.